In 1966, a 7-year-old girl named Nora Banks walked out of her family's home in Thermopolis, Wyoming, and simply vanished. For 58 years, her disappearance was a ghost story, a wound that never quite healed in a small town's heart. Generations of detectives inherited her case file, a thick book of dead ends and heartbreak, but inside a dusty, long forgotten evidence box, a single, seemingly insignificant item held the key. It was a clue that everyone missed, an object that was meaningless for decades until it wasn't. This is a story of how a 58-year secret could finally be unlocked, but not by a sudden confession, but by a revolution in science that no one in 1966 should have ever imagined. The name Nora Banks won't show up in any official cold case database. A search for a 7-year-old girl who went missing in Wyoming and was found 58 years later doesn't point to one specific news story. That's because the story of Nora Banks is a stand in, a composite of a real heartbreaks and the very real hope now offered by modern science. It represents the thousands of cold cases sitting in file drawers across the world, each one a puzzle waiting for the right piece. So while Nora may be a fictional stand in for the countless victims whose stories have faded, the forensic breakthroughs solving these impossible cases are incredibly real. This isn't just a story about one missing girl. It's about how technology has finally caught up with tragedy. And it's about the painstaking police work and scientific leaps that are piecing together puzzles decades in the making. It all starts with looking at the evidence of the past to the eyes of the future.
Blood on the grass won't wash away. Undetected foot.
For a case to go cold for over a half a century, there has to be a perfect storm of limitations. Back in the 1960s, police work was a world away from what we see on TV today. Investigations relied on eyewitnesses, shoe leather detective work, and basic evidence collection. There was no national DNA database, no digital footprints, and information sharing between agencies. It was a far cry from the instant networks we have today. When a child like Nora vanished, the search was intense but local. Police would have interviewed family and friends, relentless searching the area. But if those first crucial 48 hours gave them nothing, the trail would quickly go cold. Evidence was preserved with the best of intentions, but its true potential was a mystery. A strand of hair, a smudge on clothing, or a discarded cigarette butt was cataloged, but their stories were locked away at a microscopic level. Take the 1971 murder of Rita Curran in Burlington, Vermont. For over 50 years, her case sat unsolved. A key piece of evidence found near her body was a single cigarette butt. In 1971, that told investigators almost nothing, maybe a brand name at best. The case went cold, not for lack of effort, but for lack of technology. The clue was right there, sitting in the evidence bag for decades, just waiting. It's this exact scenario that defines cases like Nora Banks. The secret wasn't just buried in the past, it was waiting for science to invent a shovel powerful enough to dig it out. The forgotten clue that cracks a 58-year-old case is almost never a treasure map or a hidden diary. It's biological. It's a flake of skin under a victim's fingernails, a drop of blood on a windowsill, or the saliva left on a cigarette butt. This is the world of forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG. FGG is the single biggest game changer in solving cold cases in a generation. It basically uses consumer DNA databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA in reverse. Instead of you submitting your DNA to find relatives, investigators submit DNA from a crime scene to find the relatives of a potential suspect. Let's go back to the Rita Curran case. In 2014, investigators finally extracted a DNA profile from that cigarette butt, but it didn't match anyone in the criminal database, CODIS. The trail went cold again, but a few years later, they sent that same DNA profile to Parabon Nanolabs, a leader in FGG. Parabon uploaded the profile to public genealogy databases. They didn't find the killer, but they found his distant cousins. From there, it became a monumental task of reverse engineering a family tree. Genealogists build the family trees of those cousins, looking for where they are intersect at a common ancestry. Then they trace all that ancestors' descendants down to the present day by cross-referencing this with geography, age, and other facts. They can narrow thousands of people down to one. In Rita Curran's case, the tree led them straight to William D. Ruse, a man who lived just 2 floors above her and died of a drug overdose in 1986. After 51 years, a cigarette butt had finally told its story. Our story of Nora Banks is set in Wyoming, and while her name is a composite, the state's commitment to solving its cold cases is very real. In 2024, Wyoming passed House Bill 58, a 5-year pilot program that allocates $150,000 to the Division of Criminal Investigation to use forensic genetic genealogy. This funding was driven partly by a desire to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous persons and to bring closures to families who have waited for decades. This legislation means that forgotten clues and evidence boxes across Wyoming now have a chance to speak. It's a state-sponsored commitment to the very science that could hypothetically solve a case like Nora's. And this isn't just that theory. It's being put into a practice nationwide. The technology has solved cases with even less evidence than a cigarette butt. Take the 1972 murder of 20-year-old Jody Loomis in Washington. Her case went cold for nearly 50 years. The key piece of evidence was a single hair found on one of her boots. For decades, that hair wasn't enough. With modern techniques, a DNA profile was developed and sent to a Parabon Nano Labs, the same company that helped solve the Rita Curran case. The genealogy work pointed to one man, Terrence Miller. When he was arrested in 2019, it was an answer Jody's family had waited 47 years for. Miller took his own life before a final verdict, but a jury still found him guilty, delivering justice through a single strand of hair. These breakthroughs are giving hope to thousands of families, but many of these advancements rely on open source DNA databases, where people voluntarily upload their information. It raises questions about privacy and ethics, but also about the power of community in solving the most painful mysteries. What are y'all's thoughts on using public genealogy databases for criminal investigations? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're finding this exploration of forensic science compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next investigation. So how would this all come together for our 58-year-old case? The disappearance of Nora Banks. Let's imagine what detectives armed with Wyoming's new FGG funding would do. They would reopen Nora's evidence boxes and sort among the faded photos and typed reports. They look for anything that might contain the perpetrator's DNA. Maybe it's a tiny piece of fabric Nora tore from her attacker's shirt, or even the dirt collected from the scene. Let's say they find a single unidentified fingerprint on a shard of glass from a broken window at her home. In 1966, that print was useless, unless they had a suspect to compare it to. But today, investigators know that it's sometimes possible to get enough skin cells from a fingerprint, what's known as touch DNA, to build a usable profile. If they get lucky, the sample would be sent to a specialized lab to painstakingly extract the genetic code. That profile is uploaded. Weeks later, the results come in. A match to a third cousin, a great-grandniece who used a genealogy site to research their heritage. The genealogists at the Wyoming DCI or a lab like Parabon get to work. They build the family trees, one going back to the 1880s, the other to the early 1900s. They find the common ancestors, a pair of farmers who lived just outside Cheyenne. Now the work becomes a process of elimination. They trace every descendant. Some are women, so they're excluded. Some weren't alive in 1966. Others lived hundreds of miles from Thermopolis. After weeks of meticulous research, they left with one family, two brothers who lived in the area in the 1960s. One has a rock-solid alibi, the other a quiet man who left town without explanation in 1968. 2 years later, after Nora vanished, he had no criminal record. No one ever suspected him. He was a ghost. The final step is confirmation. Investigators might track down the man's living relatives, perhaps a child, and ask for a voluntary DNA sample. That sample confirms the DNA from the crime scene belongs to their father. After 58 years, the ghost has a name. The secret is unlocked. The story of Nora Banks is a framework for understanding one of the most significant shifts in the history of criminal justice. While Nora herself is a fictional composite, the pain of her family and the dedication of investigators are all too real. And the science that could solve her case isn't fiction, it's happening right now. From a 52-year-old cigarette butt in Vermont to a single hair in Washington, the dead are beginning to speak and their stories are being told in the language of DNA. Case frozen in time for decades are finally thawing. In fact, one of the oldest cold cases solved with this technology was a double murder from 1956 in Montana, cracked 65 years later. For the families of the missing and the murdered, these breakthroughs are more than just a science. They are the long-awaited arrival of justice. The forgotten clues, once silent, are now shouting the truth from evidence boxes across the country, proving that maybe no case is ever truly cold, and no secret can be kept forever.
Blood on the grass won't wash away. Undetected foot.